Hello and welcome to episode 67 of Question and Answer. I am your host, Panyo Basa. And those of you who have watched these shows before may notice I'm in a different room because I'm in a different house. Because we moved last weekend, which is why I didn't do a Q&A last weekend because I was busy moving. And still, we haven't got things fully sorted out, and there's like junk everywhere, and oh well. But because we didn't do a Q&A last weekend, I've got approximately twice the usual number of questions, which is going to take a while. And so, because this is probably going to be a pretty long one, before you start watching, like if you're just settling down to watch this Q&A or listen to it, you better go potty first. And just pause it, go potty, come back, because we're not going to wait for you. So you're just going to have to pause it because we're not going to wait for everybody to go potty because some people take a long time, you know? They're like in there reading and stuff or looking at their phone or whatever. And we just don't go with that. So because we've got so many questions, I better just wade into this. And the first question is from the Anti-Marxist League. And the Anti-Marxist League says, I am now planning to renounce the world, as you suggested in a previous Q&A. I've been slowly moving toward that the past year or so. Anyway, due to congenital defects in my skeletal system, I do not think I would be able to go overseas to become an ordained monk. It might not even be an option with a monastery in the United States, but I am fortunate in that I own my own home free of any debt. I have been converting it into a sort of urban hermitage. I need very little money to get by. I've been using some articles from your blog, primarily alt Buddhism, what it is or could be, and karmic minimalism in the secular West, as a guide to developing a quasi-monastic way of life for myself. Do you have any additional suggestions? This may or may not be full renunciation of the world, but it is likely the closest I'll be able to get in the present circumstances of this life. Well, congratulations to the Anti-Marxist League for intending to renounce the world. I'm not sure exactly what kind of congenital defects to the skeletal system that the Anti-Marxist League has, so that I'm not really sure whether it would be disqualifying for him to become a monk in Asia or the United States. But he does have his own home free of debt. And I mean, we can say we own our own home. I mean, we own this home now, but really you got to pay property taxes and all sorts of bills and so forth. So we don't really own anything, not even our own meat puppet. So that is good that you got everything paid off, though. That's, as paid off as you can. So he wants additional suggestions with regard to renouncing the world, this sort of being a Western unordained quasi-renunciant. And one big thing would be, I mean, I assume he still has to pay bills. He still has to buy food and pay the utilities and so forth, pay the property tax. So, I mean, he probably has to have a job still. And I would suggest you get a job that's sucks you into samsara as little as possible. Just a quiet, repetitive kind of job that's relatively stress-free, doesn't involve a lot of interpersonal interactions, especially if you're going to be like a quasi-hermit renunciant. You don't want to be into sales and marketing or real estate, anything like that. My job is fairly, I mean, I like my job in that I'm mostly working in a sheet metal shop, just mostly running machines. And it's just sort of a repetitive thing. Like if I have to make 60 J channels or head trim, if you prefer, then, it's just, you just make this piece of metal, bend it in a certain way and you set it aside. You're doing it mindfully or carefully at least, and you gotta be aware, pay attention to what you're doing so you don't squish your fingers and so forth, or you don't bend it the wrong way. So, and then when you come home, you can just forget what you were doing at work, which is nice. Another advice I would give is if you have a TV set, get rid of it. That used to be one of the first pieces of advice I would give to people is, I mean, if you want to live a more spiritual life, just get rid of your TV set. And it may seem a little hypocritical now because we've got a TV set in the living room right now. My woman has been striving to get one in the bedroom, and so far I've been able to resist that. But just internet also, try to keep that to a bare minimum. The Anti-Marxist League just today joined our Discord server, so I guess he'll have to use internet for that at least. But also, I might as well add that Tom Pelusiato's advice to people who wanted to live a spiritual life is eat less, sleep less, read less, talk less. So, considering that the information he gave is very general, I don't really know his circumstances, so I can't really give him specific advice. And also, because we've got lots and lots of questions here, I suppose that will be good enough for now. And if there's anything in particular he wants to know, he can ask me again, either in a Q&A or on the server or whatever. So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana. And Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana says, you mentioned that upādāna means uptake and āsava means encumbering influence. What is the connection between these two concepts? Because it seems both are related to things that are coming in. And yeah, they're not only related to things that are coming in, they're related to things that are essentially what are preventing you from becoming enlightened or liberated. That upādāna, its craving causes upādāna, or clinging usually is the translation for upādāna, it's clinging. And it's like attachment, clinging and attachment are the cause of all suffering in one version of the Four Noble Truths. So uptake and āsava, or upādāna and āsava, they're pretty much synonymous. In early Buddhism, like in early texts, there's lots of different words that mean essentially the same thing. And finally, or not finally, but as Buddhism, early Buddhism, sort of like streamlined its philosophy and sort of settled on doctrines and so forth. They settled on terminology, and so a lot of the early terms just sort of fell away, or they're still there in the suttas, but they just didn't get continually used later on. And that's one way you can tell early suttas from later suttas, is they'll have this sort of archaic terminology that isn't yet standardized. So upādāna and āsava probably mean about the same thing, although upādāna seems to be more of a conscious thing. It's like an act of will, that you take this thing, you adhere to it, you cling to it. Whereas āsava, there's more of a connotation of, a lot of it is subliminal, it's like subconscious, underlying tendencies would maybe be associated with āsava more than with upādāna, but ultimately they mean pretty much the same thing. It's just something that you're attracted to, you desire it, you cling to it, and then that clinging acts as a kind of burden that prevents you from becoming liberated. So I think I'll just move on to Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana's next question, which is as follows. To achieve jhana, we must remove the 5 hindrances, nivarana, and when they are absent, we naturally enter jhana. Since an arahant never has the 5 hindrances present, are they technically always in jhana? And the orthodox answer to that is no. In fact, there are arahants that never attain jhana. There are arahants called dry-visioned arahants who don't have any psychic powers. They're not masters of jhana. They just got like neighborhood concentration, and this is going with like orthodox explanations. And just through vipassana, through insight, they became enlightened without going into really deep contemplative states. So To achieve jhana, we must remove the five hindrances temporarily. You don't remove them permanently until you're fully enlightened, but you have to suppress them or like attenuate them, keep them at bay. But then even when you do that, you don't just automatically get jhana. I mean, you still have to develop samadhi and so forth. So that removing or attenuating the five hindrances, it's just like opening a door. Just because the door is open doesn't mean you're going through it, but you can't go through it unless the door is open. They're prerequisites to move on to the next stage. So you have to remove or keep at bay temporarily the five hindrances in order to attain jhana, but they're not the same thing. It's not like you just automatically get sucked into jhana when you're like in a quiet, relatively serene, mindful mood. So I'll just move on to Siovaksh and Sipad Zidana's next question, which is, the ancient school called the Pudgalavādins had the idea that even though there is no self, there is a person existing. They say personhood is like fire created by the fuel of the aggregates. They use Samyutta Nikaya 22.22 to back this up. Quote, the five aggregates are truly burdens. The burden carrier is the person. Taking up the burden is suffering in the world. Laying the burden down is blissful, unquote. The Theravada Kata Watu goes to extreme lengths to say that this is a false view and tries to make it seem like it is affirming a self. I've heard some scholars of early Buddhism claim that the Pudgalavāda view is probably the closest to what is in the suttas, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on this subject? Well, with regard to this last statement here, I've heard some scholars of early Buddhism claim that the Pudgalavāda view is probably the closest to what is in the suttas. I would guess that these are Western people who just have this Western preference for a real self, maybe even an eternal soul. And when they see the Pudgalavādan views, they're like, that's good. I like that. It must be right. But yeah, Pudgalavāda, other Buddhists had this tendency to consider the Pudgalavādins to be people who kicked atāditi out through the front door and then snuck it in through the back again by calling it something else. They couldn't call it atmavada or attavada because obviously Buddhism teaches no self. So they come up with this person or individual, the Pudgala. And yeah, in a way, all Buddhism, even Theravada Buddhism, would agree that personhood is like a fire created by the fuel of the aggregates. But a fire has no like abiding essence. It's different from one moment to the next. Every particle in that fire is different from one moment to the next. And so the name fire is just this convenient, like wohara desana. It's just this like worldly language that is ultimately delusional or at least illusory. But you have to use words when you're dealing with samsara. So it's this samsaric term that you stick onto the person. The Buddha himself referred to people. He referred to persons, but he wasn't insisting that they are ultimately real because they aren't. And what the Pudgalavādins were trying to do is to try to say that there is some reality to this person aside from just like a flame or a river that's just different from one moment to the next with no abiding self-essence. So that was the problem with the Pudgalavādins, and I do not think that the early Buddhists were Pudgalavādins. I don't think the Buddha himself was teaching Pudgalavāda. It may be that the earliest Buddhism, like in the Atthakavagga, is saying, don't believe in self, don't believe in not self, don't believe anything. And then early Buddhism, according to the hypothesis, just figured, you have to choose between is and isn't to form a position. You have to have a position in order to have like this spiritual system that's organized, with a set of tenets and doctrines and so forth. And so isn't is safer than is just because you've got less to cling to. So there is a chance that it started off, you're not supposed to believe in self or not self. But then the early Buddhists settled on not self. But even that is not helping the Pudgalavādan view at all. Because really, I do agree that they probably, they kicked out self through the front door and then snuck it in through the back again. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here, also from Siovaksh and Sipadzidana, which is, the Dhammakaya sect in Thailand claims that unlike all other things, Nibbana is the true self. Are they regarded as heretical, and what are your thoughts on them? I've heard of the Dhammayut sect in Thailand, and I have heard a lot of Thai ajahns talking about the citta that is beyond the aggregates, that is the true self, or, it's the observer. Even Ajahn Chah was talking about how the citta is, the observer of phenomena and so forth. But, I mean, to say that Nibbana is the true self is just, that's just flat out heresy, because it's sabbe dhamma anatta, sabbe sankhara dukkha. I mean, all conditioned things are dukkha. Sabbe sankhara anicca. All conditioned things are anicca. But it's not sabbe sankhara anatta, it's sabbe dhamma anatta, which means anything conditioned or otherwise, including nibbana, is not self. So, they're heretics, going with orthodox Theravada anyway. So my thoughts on them. I never really heard of the Dhammakaya sect. I mean, I've heard of the Dharmakaya, which is the belief in sort of a universal, pervasive consciousness, or the Buddha essence that pervades the entire universe. But that's a Mahayana concept and not a Theravadan one. So, I think I gave my thoughts. And so I'll just move on to Siovaksh and Sipadzidana's next question, which is, can you please do more sutta readings? And I can do that. I don't have a problem with that. It's just that, especially lately, I mean, I went through like a month of stress and sort of just being kind of depressed. Like my consciousness was kind of contracted, and I wasn't doing much more videos than were necessary. And then we started moving, and there's been a lot of stuff going on. I work full time, but sutta readings are actually pretty easy, because I sit there and read and then give a little bit of commentary afterwards. So I can do that, especially if people keep pestering me. I need a fire under my ass to get going sometimes. So I'll just move on to Siovaksh and Sipadzidana's next and last question, which is in the Digha Nikaya 15, which is the Nidana Sutta, if I remember correctly. In Digha Nikaya 15, the Buddha considers 4 views of a self. The first is that feeling is self, and is easy to understand because feelings are impermanent, and means that the supposed self is also impermanent. However, the second view of the self are about rebuking someone who says feelings are not self. And then he gives this long, it's like a commentarial thing, including lots of quotes, but he kind of messed up. There's like typos and stuff and he sort of skips one part or gives it the wrong name or something. So I'm just gonna, I've already kind of looked up Digha Nikaya 15. This is Walsh's translation. I'll just read this entire section and then get back to his question here. And that is, in what ways, Ananda, do people regard the self? They equate the self with feeling. Feeling is myself, or feeling is not myself. Myself is impercipient, or feeling is not myself, but myself is not impercipient. It is of a nature to feel. Now, Ananda, one who says feeling is myself should be told, there are 3 kinds of feeling, friend: pleasant, painful, and neutral. Which of the 3 do you consider to be yourself? When a pleasant feeling is felt, no painful or neutral feeling is felt, but only pleasant feeling. When a painful feeling is felt, no pleasant or neutral feeling is felt, but only painful feeling. And when a neutral feeling is felt, no pleasant or painful feeling is felt, but only neutral feeling. Pleasant feeling is impermanent, conditioned, dependently arisen, bound to decay, to vanish, to fade away, to cease, and so too are painful feeling and neutral feeling. So anyone who, on experiencing a pleasant feeling, thinks, this is myself, must at the cessation of that pleasant feeling think, myself has gone. And the same with painful and neutral feelings. Thus, whoever thinks feeling is myself is contemplating something in this present life that is impermanent, a mixture of happiness and unhappiness, subject to arising and passing away. Therefore, it is not fitting to maintain feeling is myself. But anyone who says feeling is not myself, myself is impercipient, should be asked, if, friend, no feelings at all were to be experienced, would there be the thought, I am? To which he would have to reply, no, Lord. Therefore, it is not fitting to maintain feeling is not myself, myself is impercipient. And anyone who says feeling is not myself, but myself is not impercipient, myself is of a nature to feel, should be asked, well, friend, if all feelings absolutely and totally ceased, could there be the thought, I am this? To which he would have to reply, no, Lord. Therefore, it is not fitting to maintain feeling is not myself. Myself is not impercipient. Myself is of a nature to feel. Okay, so that was the part he was asking about. Now I'm going to find this again. Okay, so then at the end of his question, he says, can you please explain the logic in these 3 points and what they are trying to say? So first is the self is feeling. Yeah, I mean, the sutta pretty much explains that fairly well. It's, the feelings are changing all the time. Sometimes they're pleasant feelings, sometimes unpleasant feelings, but it's different feelings all the time. And so if you stop having a feeling, then you would stop having yourself, in a sense. It's, in a way, it's sort of like the flame analogy again. It's like the flame is different from one moment to the next. So you can't really call it an abiding entity. And, our feelings are the same way. You can't really call those an abiding entity because they're always changing. So then the other theory is that your feeling is impercipient. And let's see here. So my friends, should feelings altogether in every way stop without remainder, then with feeling completely not existing owing to the cessation of feeling, would there be the thought, I am? And that's no, Lord. Well, a self presumably would be aware. To have a completely unconscious self, I mean, it's almost like a contradiction in terms. So that's sort of what he's referring to here, is if your self is just oblivious to everything, it doesn't feel anything, then, I mean, how could you say that it's yourself? I mean, we assume that our self is, the observer, the one that's feeling the feelings. And so if you're saying that yourself doesn't feel feelings, then, I mean, yourself is just blind and dumb and just unconscious, essentially. Is completely unaware. So then the third one is you've got a self that isn't your feelings, but it is sensitive to feelings. And then, let's see, how does he argue this? See, thus in this manner, Ananda, one does not see fit. Oh, wait, I think I skipped that. Rather, I'll have to go back to the original here. Okay. And anyone who says feeling is not myself, but myself is not impercipient, myself is of a nature to feel, should be asked, well, friend, if all feelings absolutely and totally ceased, could there be the thought, I am this? To which there would have to be the reply, no, Lord. So that one's a little more subtle, maybe a little trickier. It's just saying that, if the feelings stopped, then yourself would have to stop too, because again, just like before, yourself would just be oblivious, it'd be unaware. And people do not consider their self to be unconscious or completely oblivious and unaware. So the very possibility that could happen, that your feelings could stop, would mean that yourself, I mean, it wouldn't be yourself would continue somehow, but it would be like blind and deaf and just numb and everything, and there wouldn't be anything there. Because even feelings apply to your own thoughts, so yourself wouldn't be able to have any kind of subjective experience or like objective experience. So I guess that's what it means. And that was a long question, so I better move on to the next question. This is from Arain. And Arain says, did you ever see Burmese people with tattoos, or do they have any traditional tattoos? Yeah, it's pretty, lots of people got tattoos in Burma. I've seen monks with just tattoos all over them. In fact, Up until around, maybe around World War II or a little after, it was traditional for all Burmese men to be tattooed from their waist to their knees. And so it'd be all covered up by their sarong, like this longi. But if they'd have to lift up their skirts to cross a creek or something, it'd just be like sleeve tattoos just covering, their behind and their legs, their thighs and everything. But that's kind of out of style now, but still lots and lots of tattoos. I used to know this monk. He had a degree in English. He had a university degree in English, and he just had tattoos all over his body. But the thing is, the main purpose of tattoos in Burma is not ornamentation. It is like protection. It's the power of the tattoo prevents you from like being the victim of witchcraft or just bad luck in general or snake bites. I was told that it used to be the case that thieves, like burglars, would get a tattoo of a yawning cat tattooed onto their thigh, which would make them more agile. They could like jump higher and stuff. But I cannot recall seeing a tattoo on a Burmese person. I assume they're there. Yeah, I'm sure that there are. People will get there's some guy will have like a big spider or something tattooed on his arm. But aside from that, most tattoos in Burma are protective. Like you can go to a fair, like even like little kids, they'll go to a fair and they'll be like the tattoo artist there. He'll just like tattoo like 3 dots on their wrist, like right here, that has some protective value. Or they'll have something called an in, which looks sort of like a tic-tac-toe with like just sort of abstract symbols in various boxes of the tic-tac-toe board that has supposedly some paranormal like virtue to it. So yeah, like that in thing or just the 3 dots would be standard traditional tattoos. So I'll just move on to Arian's next tattoo question. If a Burmese villager had to get a Buddhist tattoo, what do you think would be the most likely Buddhist symbol or image they would choose? And I cannot remember seeing like a specifically Buddhist tattoo on a Burmese Buddhist. I assume some people do. Maybe just the 3 dots would be like, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha or something. That has the power, just these 3 dots, because it symbolizes, the 3 gems or something. But I've never seen like a Buddha image tattooed on somebody or a Bodhi leaf or anything like that. Maybe some kind of text, but I can't remember seeing that either. Most of the tattoos I have seen, other than just the standard scorpion or spider or something, would be like these magical protective tattoos. So if a Burmese villager had to get a Buddhist tattoo, they had to get one. What do you think would be the most likely Buddhist symbol or image? Oh, gosh, I don't know. Just 3 dots, maybe? Maybe? So, next tattoo question from Arian. If you yourself had to pick just one Buddhist image to put on your body forever, what would it be? And that's kind of cheating. I would cheat because if I were going to tattoo, I'd just get like the Om symbol. I don't have any tattoos at present, but like I actually drew it. It's not a good drawing, but Om, like maybe like on my left shoulder blade or something. And technically this is Hindu. There's like Upanishads mentioning Om and so forth, but it has been adopted by Buddhists. Om Mani Padme Hum, that kind of a thing. It might be Mahayana Buddhism, but it still technically qualifies as Buddhist, I guess. So yeah, I'd do that. And then Arian's next question is, and what would you choose if you had to get a non-Buddhist tattoo? And again, Hindu, Buddhist and Hindu. So it's Buddhist and non-Buddhist at the same time. Although my sweetheart has talked about us getting like a symbol representing us that nobody would know what it meant except for us, I guess, somewhere on our bodies. So that it'd be like a toss up between that and Om, I guess. So that's it for the Arians tattoo questions. And next is the Ariya Suwasti project, who says, is Arian trying to get you to get a tattoo? And yeah, I think maybe she is, to tell you the truth. So I think I'll just move on to the Ariya Suwasti project's next question. Do you believe in, or do you believe there is any validity to the stories of any of the following? Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, Yeti, or Chupacabra? Well, Bigfoot and Yeti, I think, would go together. They'd be like two species of the same genus, assuming that they're biological entities. But the thing is, even the Burmese have their version of Bigfoot, which they call the Ye. And it's big, and it's hairy, and it smells bad, and it lives in the woods, and it can abduct people. You know, it's scary. You don't want to mess with them. But they're considered to be a kind of ghost. You know, they can appear and disappear, which may be why they haven't actually caught one of these things, or at least the government's not admitting to it, if you know what I mean. So the Loch Ness Monster, I'm not so sure about the Loch Ness Monster. I'm rather skeptical that there's like some kind of plesiosaur. There'd have to be a number of them like reproducing there. So it'd have to be a large enough population that they're not just killing themselves off with inbreeding, you know, just lethal genes doubling up on them. I have no idea what a chupacabra really is. I don't never really studied up on chupacabras for some reason. But Bigfoot or Yetis, it could be. I mean, I've discussed this sort of thing before with guests on the show that has no name. It could just be a kind of like a being from an alternate world close to ours on a similar vibration to ours that can kind of bleed through. You know, especially like modern Western humans. You know, we're sort of like a radio receiver that's very precise in the wavelength or the frequency that we can pick up. But reality is just, you know, all possible frequencies. And so more primitive people or children, certain animals, they might have a fuzzier, less narrow wavelength that they're receptive to because they haven't refined it down to be precise in this materialistic world. You know, they're living in a more dreamlike kind of world. And it could be that in a world like that, you know, they can see things that other people can't see because they're seeing things that are close to our reality, but just kind of right on the other side of the veil, so to speak. And yeah, it may be that something like a Bigfoot or a Yeti or a Ye, you know, they can sort of blend through, you know, they just kind of bleed through for, especially for people that, you know, they're more liminal, so to speak. You know, they just have a broader, fuzzier wavelength of reality that they're receptive to. But with regard to the Loch Ness Monster, I'm not sure. I mean, I've seen the old famous pictures and stuff, but um, yeah, that's a weird one. But with regard to Bigfoot and Yeti, I think there might be some kind of reality to them, but I don't think that they are biological creatures, you know, like anthropoid apes or anything like that. I do think that they're like a liminal kind of paranormal event that can sort of bleed into our version of reality because they're coming from a reality that's close enough to ours that there's a certain affinity. So I'll just move on to the Ariya Sawasti Project's next question here. Is it ever acceptable to deceive another by withholding information if there is no intent to harm? Not lying, but not telling everything you might know. I should add that this scenario is in regard to any transaction to get another to act or conform with one's own will. Side note, I believe that most, if not all, business transactions have some element of this. Um, well, withholding information is ethically neutral in Buddhism. I mean, not doing anything, to just remain silent is morally, ethically neutral, unless you've got some kind of bad mental states causing you to be silent. But just outwardly, just sitting there, not doing or saying anything is just ethically neutral. So, but then he adds this proviso a little farther down. I should add that this scenario is in regard to any transaction to get another to act or conform with one's own will. Well, I think sometimes, let's say, um, somebody wants to do something like immoral or something harmful to themselves, and you just keep your mouth shut. You know, like they're saying, "Oh, I'd love to go to that party, but I don't have a ride," and you know that they could have a ride, but you just don't say anything because you don't want them to go to this party where there's going to be like heroin addicts or whatever. You know, it would not be a good experience for them. You just sit there in silence, then that might be more good than bad, even though in a way, I mean, I'm not sure how you deceive another person by withholding information other than, you know, you're selling them a car and you just don't tell them that the transmission is shot. You know, that's not good. But I mean, if you're doing it for their benefit, then yeah, I think that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing because again, just remaining silent is not in and of itself immoral, you know, under any circumstance. But it depends on your motivations because it's the accompanying mental states causing you to be silent that are really the point. So, yeah, if your best interests, I mean, the other person's best interests are your concern and you're just remaining silent, I think that, yeah, that would be fine in certain cases. So I'll just move on to the next question, which is from Lieberlam. And Lieberlam says, would you consider traveling to Burma again to get a traditional yant tattoo? So there's a lot of tattoo questions tonight. Would you ask for a custom tattoo or go with their gut feeling? I hear they usually decide for the person what tattoo to give them. Well, I'm not exactly sure what a yant tattoo is. I've never heard the term yant before. At least I don't remember hearing it. So, would I consider traveling to Burma again to get a traditional yant tattoo? No, I would not. I would not seriously consider traveling to Burma at all, really, for any reason. I've lived in Burma for more than 20 years, like 23, 24 years. And yeah, I don't have any real reason to go back there. I wouldn't go all the way back to get some kind of traditional Burmese tattoo. One reason for that is the Burmese, bless their hearts, for the most part, have very little aesthetic taste. They're just not an artistic or aesthetically sensitive people. I've met a few Burmese people that were very talented artists, I have to admit, but they are exceptions to the rule. Even most people who are called artists in Burma, they just learn how to crank out the same kind of picture or statue or song. This, I mean, it's just they learn this like I don't know what you call it, like a template, and they just keep cranking them out, and they're not really artists at all, in my opinion. But yeah, the average Burmese tattoo artist, or even the above average Burmese tattoo artist, is somebody I would not let come near me with like tattooing needles, because I would not trust that they'd give me something that didn't look like a total eyesore. And I really don't have any great faith in magical protective tattoos anyway. It's like a placebo effect. If you believe that it's helping you and protecting you, it might actually help you and protect you, but still, I think the Om would protect me just as well as any, you know, greenish ink thing that some traditional Asian tattoo artist would want to put on my body. And as a general rule, it's all just monochrome. It's all just one color of ink, like greenish bluish or bluish greenish or something. So yeah, no, I wouldn't ask for a custom tattoo or go with their gut feeling. I mean, if someone was like forcing me to get a tattoo from the traditional yant tattoo artist in Burma, you know, he forced me to go to Burma, you know, at gunpoint presumably, and he just marched me to this yant tattoo artist, then at least I got the choice of going with my own design or letting them decide. Yeah, I'd trust my own taste more than I would trust this total stranger I might be able to like look at what he's got tattooed on his own body, but get some idea. But then again, it might be some other yant tattoo artist that tattooed him. So yeah, I'm just not really into tattoos. I have to admit. My father had a tattoo. My brother's got several. Even my sweetheart's got one or two. But I just never had any desire. It's like the brand new jar of peanut butter where you don't want to mess it up because it's so smooth and nice on top. I kind of feel that way about my own skin to some degree, even though it's gradually getting less smooth as I get older. So I'll just move on to Libra Lamb's next question here. RFK Jr. or Donald Trump? Yeah, I'm going with Donald Trump, definitely. RFK Jr. Just the fact that he's a Democrat. I'm pretty sure within the past 10 years I must have vowed at least once never to vote Democrat ever again. I used to vote Democrat all the time, but they've gone insane. And yeah, I know Donald Trump better than I know RFK Jr. anyway. I know what to expect now. I voted for him even when I wasn't sure what to expect, but he satisfied me that he was a competent president, unlike our current installed vegetable. So yeah, Donald Trump. That was an easy question. So I'll just move on to Libra Lamb's next question here. Do you think if you tried meditating, it would have any effect as a layman compared to the higher states experienced as a monk? Um, yeah, if I were to sit down cross-legged, get into the full lotus if I'm still capable of doing that, and just tried to meditate, I'd get decent meditation, I suppose, but I don't think it would be anything compared with the best meditation I had as a monk. Just when you got all this momentum going and you're just dedicating your life to meditating, meditating 6 hours a day at least, even if you're not doing any kind of special retreat, just like my first 10 years as a monk, I was probably averaging about 6 hours a day of meditation. And yeah, as a layperson, that's one reason why I don't do systematic meditation anymore. It's just like having to go back to the ABCs. So yeah, it would have some effect, but it wouldn't be anything remotely resembling. Probably, I mean, I could be surprised. I could just sit down and go into some deep contemplative state, but being realistic, I would say that probably it'd just be sort of like beginner's mind again, where you're just starting it again, where that would improve the quality of the meditation. But yeah, it would not be the same level of meditation. I guess that's the question he asked, so I answered it. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Rui. And Rui says, hello, Panyo. Here is the thing. There is an inner visual field that subsists there. It is made of colors, shapes, distances, and intensities of all of the above, sometimes just as non-proliferation, thoughts, mentations, seems to be right at hand. A color or shape enters this inner field, and it is at once accompanied by its respective tag, i.e., red, fog, fogginess, left, right, in front, etc. What is your take on or experience of this? And then he asked another question, which is just a continuation of the first one, which is, or is there a more basic order that must be in place to prevent this type of categorization to even occur in the inner field? Could that be hardcore sila? Could that be the resultant indifference to pleasure, pleasant, neutral, unpleasant? Or is the practice to be placed on, directed to an utterly transcendent order? So what he's saying here, as far as I can understand this, it is kind of abstract, is that you've got this inner field of awareness. And like you open your eyes, let's just go with vision. It's the standard thing that people talk about when they're talking about this sort of thing. Like I got a book, Buddhist Logic, back there on the bookcase. That's just, its standard is like a pixel of blue. That's like what they're working with, is this pixel of blue, and they're talking about all the, how you experience it, and what it leads to, and what it doesn't lead to if you somehow stop experiencing the pixel of blue. So it's just to go with vision, field of vision, but it's like you can be like inner vision or just perceptual field in general. So it's made of color, shapes, distances, and intensities of all the above. Sometimes, just as non-proliferation seems to be right at hand, a color or shape enters this inner field and is at once accompanied by the respective tag. Well, first of all, once you get good enough at mindfulness, the respective tag stops. You stop thinking, you stop identifying it as this or that. Like you can be sitting there in meditation and a dog starts barking outside somewhere and you hear it, but it's just sound, it's just auditory sensation. You do not identify it as barking dog. Once you've identified it as barking dog, you've pretty much stopped meditating properly. I mean, you do get sort of a second chance where you can be mindful of yourself thinking barking dog, but generally, you hear the barking dog and you're thinking, oh, that dog is so noisy. Why does its owner put up with this stuff? And next thing you know, it's 10 minutes later and you're still thinking about dogs or something, thinking about some dog you had when you were 6 years old or something. But so one of the beginning things you do is you try to stop the mental commentary that's labeling stuff. And then you can get more advanced where it's just like the sound of the barking dog, it's just auditory sensation. But then when you stop attributing qualities to it, it's just passive reception. You're sort of like a window and the sound is just going through the window, but it's like going in one ear and out the other. Then in a way it all just becomes this neutrality. I mean, to some degree, you can't have it absolutely perfect because, for example, I have read that even before a visual datum gets to the optical lobes of your brain, even your retina is already starting to process the information. Like it's sharpening outlines. That's one thing your retinas do, sharpens outlines. And so, they're like fixing up the shapes and everything to make them easier to process once it gets to your brain. So, I mean, some of that is unavoidable. But even so, it's like I used to work on Japanese ships and I didn't know Japanese at the time. And so, I was just the American biologist on board, just observing the fishing operations because they were in US territorial waters. And you just kind of tune it out. People are talking Japanese, you don't understand. You understand maybe a few words of it, but it's not worth the effort to try to understand what they're saying. So you just kind of tune it out. And to some degree, you do that with regard to everything when you're meditating, but it's sort of a different kind of tuning out. It's more like you just become like a mirror. Your mind becomes like a mirror that's just, if anything is there, it's there, but you're not directing your attention to it. You're not like making any effort to perceive that, to single it out and dismiss everything else. It's just all there while it's there, and then it goes away and something else is there, but you're not thinking about it at all. Your mind is just like a mirror that it doesn't make any kind of judgments or choices or anything. It's all there, and you're doing as little as possible to process the data. So let's see here. Or is there a more basic order that must be in place to prevent this type of categorization to even occur? Well, you have to develop mindfulness to a degree that's difficult if you're not a monk or you just don't have like an inborn talent for it. Some people, they're just natural born meditators. They can sell used cars or whatever, and then they can just go into deep meditative states just because they've got like this talent, like a talent for drawing or music or math or something. So could that be hardcore sila? It's mysticism essentially. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, you get into a deep mystical state where everything is how do I explain it? Well, I've mentioned St. John of the Cross before, and how St. John of the Cross, his instructions for how to do deep contemplation, not just superficial meditation where you're visualizing Jesus on the cross or doing, dear God, please have mercy upon me, a sinner, over and over again as a mantra, that kind of thing. When you get into high contemplation, you just dismiss all thoughts. Any thought that comes by, you just dismiss it, or like in Mahasi or Buddhist meditation, you just note it, let it go, note it, let it go, note it, let it go, until finally your mindfulness gets so good that even when a thought just starts to arise, or any kind of perception, even when it just starts to arise, you catch it immediately and it just fades back out again. So hardcore sila might be, according to Orthodox Theravada, probably other religious systems also, you have to get your sila down before you can get samadhi. You have to have perfect morality in order to have perfect concentration. And then you have to have perfect concentration in order to have perfect wisdom, according to the standard the standard doctrine. But yeah, it's not just hardcore sila. This causes your mind to stop processing data. And it's when you stop processing data, it doesn't mean that you're in a coma, that you're unconscious. You're not a hibernating squirrel. It's just that your mind is just wide open and you're more conscious than when you're perceiving stuff. Because if you're perceiving something, the sound of the barking dog or the blue dot, the blue speck, you're focusing on that to the expense of everything else. You're focusing on one thing, which is very much limiting your awareness because you're focusing on this one thing. Whereas if your mind is like a cheap camera where everything is equally in focus, you're not really focusing on anything. It's all there. You're aware of the full spectrum of your conscious experience, but you're not singling out anything and you're not labeling anything. And or even if a label starts to arise, even that can just become part of the sort of just the stuff on the mirror that is, it's sort of like your second chance. It's not quite as good as just not having it arise at all, but still, I'm probably just confusing people at this point. So yeah, it's mysticism, essentially, in a word. So, but yeah, there are levels of meditation that are way beyond just automatically labeling things or automatically singling things out perceptively and just into a this. Even that is just everything is just one big this. So I'll just move on to Rui's next question, which is, for a while now, I see little value in so-called tranquility meditation and analytic meditation. However, there is a taste of something utterly beyond, something which seems to depend only on a volitional intent, pardon the pleonasm, or on willful momentum, question mark. Or could these be just Mara delusions of great profundity? Yeah, you can call any kind of perception a Mara delusion, and the more subtle the perception is, the greater the profundity, I guess, of the Mara delusion. So he sees little value in so-called tranquility meditation and he says analytic meditation. However, there is a taste of something utterly beyond, something which seems to depend only on a volitional intent or on willful momentum. Yeah, well, that may be so, but then there's another level beyond that, beyond volitional intent and willful momentum, because volition and perception are two aspects of the same thing. They cannot arise separately. They always have to be there together. And I personally do not consider them to be two utterly distinct, qualitatively different things. Volition and perception. I think that they're just two ways of looking at the same thing. And you can't have volition without perception. You cannot have perception without volition. And so you're eventually going to go beyond volitional perception. This world is volition and perception. Is the world as will and representation. The world as volition and perception. Schopenhauer's terminology. So yeah, so long as you're perceiving something, you still got a samsaric mind. You're gonna have to go beyond perception, or at least, because the perception is itself like a manifestation of consciousness, You just see that all these perceptions as the underlying consciousness. It's like you see waves on the ocean. You don't get distracted by the waves. You just see it as water. That would be a good way of putting it. That'd be sort of a good way of explaining like a mystical state where there's still stuff going on. You're not just like a complete blank, but it might as well be a complete blank because you're seeing it all as the same underlying consciousness, for lack of a better word. But ultimately, even that becomes like paradoxical, and then there's like the stage beyond that. But I don't want to just keep spouting gobbledygook that maybe nobody will understand. So, yeah, eventually, getting back to Rui's question here, you just get to a point where you just really can't do much more with regular meditation. And like St. John of the Cross, getting back to St. John of the Cross, he was saying that he had this really interesting chapter in his book, I think it's The Ascent of Mount Carmel, where he's telling you when it is the appropriate time to stop meditating and start going into the high contemplation stuff. And one of them is where you just get bored with doing meditation, where you see little value in it anymore. And you're just tending towards silence. You just want to sit there and just empty out. And that's a good sign that you're ready to start doing what he would call contemplation, what a Buddhist would probably call jhana. But according to Rui here, that's tranquility. But if you get into real jhana, I think you'll see value in it. So I'll just move on to Rui's next question here. Well, it seems I'm now past the allowed number of questions, which is not true because one of his questions I telescoped into, two of his questions I telescoped into one, and still he still had another question to go at least. But I digress here. Well, it seems I'm now past the allowed number of questions, but the problem with music and art in general is that it elicits immediate judgments of taste, which may ensnare the mind, driving it towards opinion, and may hinder the practice, especially if there is a deliberate experiencing directed towards it or them thoughts. Yeah, I've had people bring up the point that like music, even if there's no lyrics, it's just like instrumental music. I mean, how could that be bad? But still, you have to perceive it. And again, when you're perceiving it, you're samsaric. Perception is samsara. So anything that requires, perceptual symbols is, while you're indulging in it, you're indulging in samsara and remaining stuck. You're wallowing in samsara. Although for a lot of people, some music can help to get them unstuck to some degree because it's like the perceptions they're experiencing are more exalted or subtle than the perceptions they'd be experiencing if they were looking in some other direction or listening to something else. So, but that's one reason why Buddhism as a general rule has bad music. It doesn't have nearly as good of music as, say, Christians or Muslims or Hindus, just because music is considered to be, or at least enjoying music is considered to be immoral in Buddhism or unskillful karma. So, yeah. So I guess we kind of agree on that. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Joe Doe. And Joe Doe says, is there any other interviews with Brian you could put on your playlist? I heard you guys did over 300 videos. Surely more than 115 are PC enough for YouTube. Yeah, actually, we've done a total of 6 gorillion videos. So we've done quite a few. In fact, Brian tells me that he's done more videos with me than with any other guest. We used to do quite a lot of them. I think we were doing like 2 or 3 videos a week for like at least a year, and then we went down to every 2 weeks, and then we sort of, after I dropped out of the monkhood, then the demand on having the guest monk kind of evaporated. We still do videos sometimes, but yeah, at first I wasn't putting any videos up. So for a while, like maybe more than a year ago, I think, I started just taking old videos that we had done and putting them on my own channel because they were only on his channel. And he was okay with that. He liked the idea. It's just further notoriety for him. I did have to weed out uh, a lot of videos because there are certain topics that are not to be mentioned on YouTube because you can get like warnings and strikes and so forth. And that was approximately half. When I did start uploading our videos, it was maybe half of them were safe for YouTube. Um, but I only got about halfway through before I kind of fizzled out. I've only done a few over the past 6 months, maybe just a few old ones I did, but there's still probably at least 50 videos that are safe for YouTube that I've done with Brian that I haven't has never been uploaded onto YouTube by me and are not on YouTube now because Brian has been kicked off of YouTube like 17 times. So yeah, I can still upload old videos that I've done with Brian back when I was a monk. Um, so yeah, and also some of the ones that weren't safe for YouTube, I still could upload onto BitChute. So you get a broader range of topics if you look for old videos of me with Brian on BitChute. So I'll just move on to Jodo's next question here. What's the longest someone has sat in meditation for that you know of? Also, do you believe that some advanced monks consider meditation for days or even weeks without moving? Um, the longest someone has sat in meditation, like that I have actually seen, there was a Korean Mahayana monk who came to Pandita Rama in Rangoon when I was there. And he could just flop into the full lotus and just sit there like a rock for 3 hours straight. Um, and his meditation interviews were surreal, but we needn't get into that. But I've I've heard that there is a famous Sayadaw. He's increasingly famous in Burma, and I think also in the West. He's was ordained in the The Ingu tradition, which is a pretty strange tradition, and he makes his at his meditation retreats, he'll make them sit for like 8 hours straight in the full lotus. And it's just this weird, just going beyond the pain kind of a thing. They just eventually they're in such agony that they just kind of transcend it. So I've heard of other meditation instructors who will make their, like at a meditation retreat, make the yogis sit like without moving for 6 to 8 hours. But that's a little extreme, I think. But with regard to some advanced monks that can sit in meditation for days or even weeks, yeah, I'm sure that there are. I think there are probably more Hindus than Buddhists who just go into these trance states and just remain motionless for days on end. I think with regard to jhana in Orthodox Theravada, it can last up to 1 or 2 weeks. I can't remember if it's 1 or 2 weeks that is considered to be a sort of the maximum for remaining in a state of deep jhana. But I'm sure it happens. There's some real heavy hitters out there that are just beyond the comprehension of most Westerners, including most Western Buddhists. And a lot of them are Hindus because the Hindus are more into, um, they're going higher and higher. The Buddhists, they kind of bail out sideways. As soon as you're able to get off samsara by bailing out sideways, you feel free, you just go right ahead. But with Hinduism, it's like they're just going for greater and greater and greater and greater purity, so that they're getting into these states where, um, they can just sit there without moving for a week straight. All kinds of things. They're more likely to get psychic powers too, or that's my understanding. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Garrett. And Garrett says, what does it mean to be expelled from a tradition? Wikipedia says Bhante Sujato was removed from the Ajahn Chah Forest Sangha lineage. Is that akin to being disrobed? No, it's nothing like being disrobed. And you can't really disrobe a monk. That's sort of like it's just a misconception. You can't kick a monk out of the Sangha. The only person that can kick a monk out of the Sangha is the monk himself. But I mean, you can do formal acts of censure on them, formal acts of expulsion, where you can kick them out of a monastery, or you can, even more serious than that, is you can make them sort of like not to be talked to. You're not supposed to sleep under the same roof with them. You're not supposed to bow to them or let them bow to you. You're not supposed to share food with them. They're just ostracized. And that's as close as you can get to kicking a monk out of the Sangha, unless you're going to be like the Burmese government notoriously did by just forcing a monk to become parajika by having like a prostitute rape him or something. Because if you have sex and you enjoy it for just one moment, while it's in there, then you're out. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. So, yeah, Bhante Sujato is not the only one kicked out of the Ajahn Chah forest tradition. That was also Ajahn Brahm got kicked out because of his monkey shines with ordaining bhikkhunis. And it wasn't just that he ordained bhikkhunis, it was, the story goes that Ajahn Brahm is the abbot of a monastery in Western Australia, and he invited some of the senior monks in the Ajahn Chah tradition to come to Australia to discuss the possibility of ordaining bhikkhunis. And then before they even showed up, he already just went ahead and ordained the bhikkhunis, just kind of as a way of having these senior monks just having to like assent to a done deal. And they felt like they were like used. They just felt like he had just done some shady trick on them, or so I've been told. And so he got expelled from the Ajahn Chah tradition, which all it means, if you're kicked out of the Ajahn Chah tradition, is that you're not allowed to stay at an Ajahn Chah monastery anymore. The Ajahn Chah monks aren't allowed to stay at your monastery anymore. And I mean, you're just not considered to be an Ajahn Chah monk anymore. Not officially anyway. So they're still monks, but they can't stay at Ajahn Chah monasteries anymore. And Ajahn Chah monks are like strongly discouraged from staying at one of these kicked out monks monasteries too. And that's really about as far as it goes. So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Keep the Vinaya. And Keep the Vinaya says, you said in a past Q&A that you became a Buddhist monk because you liked the strict rules and the interaction with experienced monks. Does this mean that concepts such as rebirth and the Four Noble Truths did not convince you of Buddhism? Did you only become a Buddhist monk for pragmatic reasons? And I think this is somewhat of a misunderstanding. I didn't become a Buddhist monk necessarily because I like strict rules and the interaction with experienced monks. I mean, that's certainly not why I became a Buddhist. I mean, I like Buddhism because, it acknowledged that this is not reality and that there is a way of experiencing that reality. There is a way of penetrating the veil and experiencing ultimate reality. And that was the main reason why I became a Buddhist and wanted to be an ordained monk. I mean, that's the ultimate reason why I became an ordained monk, is I wanted to know reality, not just the illusion, but I wanted to know ultimate reality that's like behind the illusion. But the thing about the rules and the strict monks, the interaction with strict monks, is I knew myself well enough to know that I can be lazy and just come up with excuses for not doing the right thing or whatever. So I liked being in the system that had like this established rule, set of rules, even though most monks don't even follow them. But because I had ordained, I was a conscientious monk and just wanted to follow the rules. So it worked for me, even though the monks around me were making very little effort to follow the rules. So the interactions with experienced monks didn't help me a heck of a lot. I mean, it did help, because even though they might not be striving for enlightenment, still they knew a lot of stuff that I didn't know. But the main reason that I became a Buddhist monk is I wanted to know reality. And so, let's see, does this mean that concepts such as rebirth and the Four Noble Truths did not convince you of Buddhism? Well, my father claimed to remember his rebirth or his past lives. I mean, he was a firm believer in reincarnation since before I was born. I just grew up with that. And the Four Noble Truths, Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much self-evident. You can't really deny that. I didn't really know much about the Four Noble Truths until I started studying Buddhism, but yeah, I mean, it does make sense. I can accept that. It's not why I became a monk, though, because it's like you've got two paths that are ultimately the same. They ultimately arrive at the same destination. It's, the path of the heart and the path of the head. Path of the heart is more feelings oriented, maybe a little more faith oriented, and you want to eliminate suffering. Whereas the path of the head is maybe more masculine, more intellect oriented. And so it's not so much suffering that I wanted to get rid of or to free myself from. It was delusion. But you free yourself from delusion, it's the same as freeing yourself from suffering. I mean, they go hand in hand, but it's just two different emphases. So I was really more into knowing reality than escaping from suffering. My father was this macho tough guy who used to say things like, a little pain never hurt anyone. And I still, I mean, as a layperson, now I really have to live that, a little pain never hurt anyone because, I mean, no matter what you do, there's going to be pain, as a monk or a layperson. But as a layperson, there may be a little more pain, more distraction to, sort of get in the way of you mindfully experiencing the pain without struggling against it, sort of a thing. So, so it's sort of a stoic lay Buddhism that I'm practicing now. So I think I answered that. Yeah, I guess I did. I guess. So I'll just move on to the next question here. Also from Keep the Vinaya. And he says, did you know that Jainism also has a concept similar to the Buddhist concept of no view? It is called anekantavāda. Anekantavāda. And it states that the ultimate truth and reality is complex and has multiple aspects. The parable of blind men and an elephant is used in Jainism to explain the doctrine of anekantavāda, of ultimate reality. Yeah, I think that would be the same as saddhavada. I read in an Indian philosophy text many years ago that in Jainism they have this doctrine called saddhavada. And sadd is some Prakrit, and the Jains have their scriptures written or composed in a Prakrit language that isn't Sanskrit and isn't Pali. It's just this other form of Prakrit that's similar to Pali. And Siad means in a way or in a sense. So in a way there is no self. In a way there is a self. In a way things can be permanent, and in a way things can be impermanent. So it's like, according to the Jains, there's an infinite number of aspects to everything. You can't see one thing from every angle simultaneously and perceive every single aspect unless you are like Mahavira. You're what is that, Tirthankara, or what's the other word? Ah, I can't remember. It starts with a V. No, it's a Kevalin, Kevali, where you're just omniscient. And then you can see everything from every single aspect, every single angle. But we common worldlings who aren't Jain Kevalins or Tirthankaras, we just see a table from one direction. We can't know everything there is to know about something all at the same time. And so you have to you just have to take everything with a grain of salt. You can't really know anything perfectly. And so it's best not to adhere to, like, this is the way it is. And that's like early Buddhism. That's true. Like the stereotypical fool in Buddhism says, only this is true, anything else is wrong. Whereas some Jain following Syadvada would say, well, this is true, but the opposite can also be true. So, yeah, I have read a little bit about Jain philosophy, and that was interesting. Syadvada or anekantavāda. I assume they're the same because they um, Keep the Vinaya seems to be describing the same thing that I was reading about in that Indian philosophy book many years ago. So I'll just move on to Keep the Vinaya's next question. Would you give food to a nun among monks at an alms round? I'm asking because her ordination was not in accordance with Buddha's commandments. Um, Even if these new bhikkhunis turn out to be, I mean, their ordination turns out to be invalid, and I think that ultimately their ordination is invalid. Still, they're renunciants, and it's good to see renunciants. Like the Buddha said, you should support. Like if you converted to Buddhism from like Jainism, you should still honor your Jain teachers, your previous teachers. You should still offer alms to any holy person. They don't have to be ordained Theravada Buddhist renunciants. I mean, any any good-hearted, sincere renunciant, even if they belong to a different religion, I mean, you're still earning merit by helping them and honoring them and respecting them. So, yeah, I think I probably would, unless she was like really just wearing her bhikkhuni status on her sleeve or something. But maybe even then, I don't know. I've never really been in that. I've never really been in that position. But yeah, I mean, if there was some nun going along with monks, even if she was considering herself to be a bhikkhuni, I might still give her food. I mean, she's still trying to practice Dhamma, I assume. She's still renouncing the world and really going for it. So that's worthy of respect anyway. So I'll just move on to Keep Doing His next question. And I think he asked more than 6 questions here. That rascally fellow. Anyway, his next question is, during your time as a monk, were there moments when you had almost no desires and were just peaceful? Yeah, when you're sound asleep, that happens pretty much every night for just about everybody. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of times when you can, I mean, it might be of longer or shorter duration, but I mean, everyone's going to have at least flashes of that. Let's see. Almost no desires and we're just peaceful. Yeah, it happens a lot, actually. I mean, if you're just living out in the woods, you don't have to work for a living, you don't have any other people to interact with, maybe just a scroungy dog that eats your leftovers, maybe ants or lizards or something. You're just out there meditating, that's like your job, then there's going to be a lot of times when you have almost no desires and are just peaceful. I mean, there's times like that now. I mean, I'm not sure what my desires are even at this moment, other than just continuing with this Q&A. It's not very many desires at the present moment. So yeah, I'll just move on to the next question here. Also from Keep the Vinaya. Do Buddhist temples in Southeast Asia have the same problems with child abuse as the Catholic Church? I've heard more. I mean, I lived in Burma for more than 20 years. I spent only like 3 weeks in Thailand, but I heard more about that sort of thing in Thailand than I did in Burma. The Burmas are just not really a sensual kind of people, which is one reason why they're not a very artistic people. I mean, I heard one rumor about one monk that I knew who was messing around with like an 18-year-old boy, supposedly. I mean, it was just gossip, and the gossip did not come from a particularly reliable source. So I took that with a grain of salt. I really don't know if that's true or not. But yeah, I lived in Burma for, I mean, like I was living behind the scenes at monasteries for a lot more years, and I never really heard of a serious case of this, of like monks, or I mean, they wouldn't really be monks if they're screwing little boys or adolescent boys, because I mean, once the penis is inserted into an orifice just to the width of a sesame seed, that's it. You're kicked out. You're excommunicated. You're parajika. Even though you might continue to wear robes and pass yourself off as a monk, in reality, you're no longer a monk. But yeah, I'm sure that it happens. I'm sure that there's like homosexual pedophile monks that just don't restrain themselves. I've heard about that in Thailand more than I've heard about it in Burma, even though I lived in Burma for many years, like in monasteries. So I'm sure it happens, but I don't think that it's anywhere near to being as rampant as in Roman Catholicism. I don't know why that is. I'm not exactly sure why Roman Catholic priests, other than men who are gay, who then join the church as an excuse for not getting married or something, and then they just can't resist the urge to continue messing around with pretty boys or something. But one thing that the Burmese people are, they're very stoic people. They're not a sensuous people. They're not a passionate people. And so there's just less of that. They're lower T, I guess. And so there's just not as much of that. And also, I guess they're more serious in their Buddhism. Even the sloppy monks, they don't doubt that it's true. Whereas I have no idea what's going on in the minds of some of these Catholic priests. That I mean, it used to be even worse back in the Middle Ages. I've read, I think it was in Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy, how there was like this papal bull, in the Middle Ages, where women were not required to make confession anymore because so many of them were being raped in the confessional booths that it was just becoming rampant and just out of control. Just the Catholic Church itself was just it was sort of like civilization was collapsing for a while. And so yeah, I've never heard about anything like that in Theravada Buddhism. There's always been sort of this serious sort of ancient Indian ascetic ideal that has helped to prevent monks from even seriously considering diddling pretty boys. But it does happen, but it's way less prevalent than in other systems. And then finally, not the very last question of all, but the last question of Keep Divinia is Arthur Schopenhauer your favorite philosopher? And no, he's not. I mean, I like him all right, but I think I would like David Hume better. I prefer David Hume to Arthur Schopenhauer. So of modern Western philosophers, I think David Hume would be my favorite. He was a radical. I mean, he was just. I read this book, Human Knowledge, Its Scope and Limits by Bertrand Russell, back when I was a monk. And I mean, the title of that book could have been, What Do We Do About the David Hume Problem? Because David Hume was just destroying stuff that was just considered axiomatic before he came along, like cause and effect. He just pounded away at the idea that just because B always follows A, that it's caused by A, that we don't really know that. So I liked him just because he was a radical, and also he said a lot of important stuff in one of his earliest book, his magnum opus. He was actually favoring a kind of anatta, that there really is no abiding self that stays the same. It's just mental images and so forth, just arising and passing away. So let's see. Yeah, I'm going with David Hume. I'm voting for Hume. So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from the wisest and humble guru. And he says, after 30 years of being a monk, you think you could survive sometime in a jungle or forest without having anything in military wilderness survival kind of sense? Well, long before I was a monk, I mean, like I said before, my father was like this macho tough guy, and he taught me how to go camping. I lived in the Pacific Northwest, which is, I mean, Washington State has at least 3 national parks and just state parks and wilderness areas everywhere, just forests everywhere. And he taught me how to camp. It was just minimalist. We didn't use tents. I mean, after about the age of 5, you'd bring a tarp that you could string up just in case it rained. Otherwise, you just slept on the ground. He had this, he bought us backpacks, but he just had this thing. It was like a pack board. It was a Trapper Nelson pack board made out of wood and canvas. It had like moose blood stains all over it because he used to use it for packing moose quarters out of the woods when he lived in Alaska. And he would just put everything into like a chicken feed sack and just lash it onto this instrument of torture that he would carry on his back. But yeah, so even as a kid, I was learning like minimalist, like survival skills. My father would teach me how to make figure 4 traps and snares, how to survive in the wilderness, essentially, how to tie good knots, which anybody should know. And as a young man, before I was a monk, I started buying like survival guides, old army surplus survival guides and just various survival guides. I still have a few e-versions on this computer. So yeah, I think I could survive fairly well. Recently, I've been watching The Walking Dead. It's this zombie apocalypse series, and I'm just sitting there, just from the beginning. I'm telling him, "Oh man, you guys need walls. What are you doing camping out in the woods like that?" I mean, with a zombie apocalypse, it's different than survival out in the wilderness necessarily. I mean, you gotta have walls. You gotta it has to be big enough that you can move around and maybe grow a garden inside, but small enough that your little group is enough to defend it. That before long, humans are going to be more dangerous than the zombies are, which came to pass. So, yeah, I think I'd do pretty well in a forest with, I don't know, just being completely naked, like naked and afraid, where you just dumped out into this forest with nobody to keep you company but this other naked, afraid person plus, the camera crew. But yeah, I think I'd do better than most people. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from White Ash Piper. And seeing this question, I realized that I forgot to do a little homework for this. But anyway, White Ash Piper says, Happy Q&A Day, Panyo Basa. I believe you're a proponent of the theory of evolution. Did you become one during your university days, getting your degree in biology, or before? What do you think of the new discoveries from the Webb telescope? And that's the homework that I forgot to do, is I really don't know what the new discoveries of the Webb telescope are. I haven't been keeping up on the Webb telescope. So with regard to that, I don't think very much because I'm oblivious. But with regard to when I started favoring the theory of evolution, I'm pretty sure it was before I became a monk. I think the first really important book that I ever read in my life was The Naked Ape by Desmond Morris, where he's describing humans as a species of animal, how we're human beings, even though we think we don't follow animal instincts, that we're just laden with animal instincts. It was really a humbling kind of a book. It wasn't necessarily a book on evolution, but I do think that before I was in university, I did read The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. I read that fairly early on. I think I was a teenager at the time. And it just makes sense. I mean, evolution and just like the fossil record I mean, obviously life has evolved on this planet, regardless of what causes the evolution. You can say God is driving the evolution. You can say that it's some kind of Schopenhauerian will. It's just this consciousness just striving to survive and exist and fulfill, whatever niches it can fulfill. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be Darwinian blind trial and error, plus some sexual selection and so forth. But yeah, I don't know exactly when it was that I became a proponent of more or less Darwinian evolution. But as soon as I became aware of the evidence, that, I mean, it is pretty obvious, to tell you the truth. Just the fossil record itself is like overwhelming evidence that there has been evolution. That the first 4 billion years of life on this planet was just anaerobic bacteria, up until you get enough oxygen in the atmosphere caused by blue-green bacteria and maybe some chemosynthetic bacteria, that you can start having like more advanced metabolism, and you start getting like eukaryotic cells and then multicellular life and so forth. And the Cambrian evolution, and it's like, I don't know, maybe I'm just babbling, but I mean, it's obvious that like the older the rocks are, the older the fossils are, the less variation you're going to have. It's like the oldest fossils are just like bacteria, and then you start getting into like primitive, very primitive multicellular life is long after the bacteria showed up, very primitive plant life, and then it's like the first, probably most of the existence of fishes in this world, they were jawless. All the oldest, the fossils of fish, it's just jawless fish because the lower jaw hadn't evolved yet or hadn't appeared yet. So yeah, even though I'm not a materialist, the theory of evolution is got so much evidence supporting it that, I mean, as a worldly, within the context of samsara, it's just the obvious theory to support with regard to how we wound up here. I mean, it could be that it's like I did a video with Ajahn Punadamo maybe a year ago, where he was saying that, just blind Darwinian trial and error and so forth isn't sufficient to result in us humans, that there had to be like karma involved. It's like some sort of metaphysical, like conscious force driving evolution. And that's fine. I mean, but it's still, the evolution is still happening regardless. So I'll just move on to the next question here. This is from Makubo. And I warned you in advance, this is going to be a long one, but maybe not nearly as long as I thought, because we're well over halfway done. Anyways, Makubo says, many supporters of mass immigration to the West characterize the phenomenon as karma for the West's history of colonialism in the Third World. This is particularly interesting as, for the supporters of open borders, immigration is simultaneously held to be an unalloyed good for society, as well as some kind of karmic revenge. What is your reaction to the usage of the word karma here? Well, I think the usage of the word karma here is sort of like the usage of the word karma on YouTube videos, like instant karma. Somebody's doing something they shouldn't ought to do, and then, it's like it backfires on them. And these people really don't understand karma. They don't understand that karma is a mental state, and that it's in the individual person, individual person. Yeah, they don't know what karma is. They just think that it's some sort of, the universe is getting revenge on them for their ancestors having colonized some new land, but all lands have been colonized. Even, yeah, I mean, the only places in this world that haven't been, where you haven't had a stronger tribe just invading and like displacing a weaker tribe or absorbing the weaker tribe. It may be some remote islands or just really remote desert areas, maybe like the center of Australia or something. But aside from that, everywhere else, it's stronger people have moved in and taken over the land. They've taken it away from weaker people, and that is a kind of evolution itself. That's how societies evolve. It's largely how the human race evolved. One reason why our evolution happened so fast is because we're just a warlike people, and we just out conquering weaker people than us, or at least our ancestors did that. So let's see. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't take this very seriously about the supporters of mass immigration, karma for the West history of colonialism. I mean, they're just like, they've got like this hysterical blindness with regard to most of the human race and most of the world. They just want white people to be the bad guys. And because mainly just because they're indoctrinated with this cultural Marxism stuff, where, white people have replaced the bourgeoisie in general as the villain to be overcome. So it's just a bunch of lame arguments, essentially. Anyways, and the fact that they consider it to be an unalloyed good for society as well as some kind of karmic revenge, well, I mean, it's just doublethink. It's a lot of indoctrinated people will just believe, two essentially diametrically opposed positions, sometimes maybe even at the same time. So, what is my reaction to the usage of the word karma here? It's just an ignorant usage of the word without really understanding what it means. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Cricket and Frog Song. And Cricket and Frog Song says, is it ever a good idea to make bad things happen on purpose to expiate your karma? And that's essentially what the Jains did, or probably some of them still do. But in Buddhism, no, it's not a good idea to make bad things happen on purpose, because when you're making something happen, that's karma too. You're just making more karma. Karma literally means making or doing or acting, action, deed. So, Yeah, I don't think it's ever a good idea to make bad things happen on purpose to expiate your karma. I mean, just let it happen at its own rate. That's the middle path. Really, I mean, that is the original, or considered to be the original middle path. In the first sermon of the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, it's the middle path between self-indulgence and self-torture. And the self-torture is what other sects were doing, including the Jains and the Ajivikas, where they're making bad things happen to themselves. They're torturing themselves. And that's not what Dhamma teaches. I mean, it's just not good. It's just making things worse, essentially. Because you're making karma from deliberately hurting somebody, including deliberately hurting yourself. You're just making more bad karma by doing it. So I think I'll just move on to the next question here. And this is a good one. I gotta admit, this is a juicy one. This is from Austin. And Austin says, my friend keeps arguing with me about karma, and she keeps saying, these dead children in Palestine, did they just have bad karma from a past life? We just give reasons to our life, but it's completely meaningless. Or, you're victim blaming dead children if you believe all suffering is caused by your own self. And Austin continues here. He says, and I don't really know how to respond to these, and they're all very sticky. Any ideas? I can't really rebut the idea that these children are dying because they did something bad in a past life. Maybe by rebut he means like explain it, how it's true. Rebut means to like deny or conclusively deny or something. But anyway, with regard to one thing that really sticks out for me is this argument given by his friend. You're victim blaming dead children if you believe all suffering is caused by your own self. And that is like victim blaming. That's just a kind of slur. It's like someone who's indoctrinated or a normie and they don't have a really good argument. They'll just fling a slur as a way of just like causing a short circuit in the whole thing and winning the argument by default. It's like, I mean, a lot of you just have experience with, people using the term racist or sexist or, transphobe or homophobe, just as a way of just, it's almost like dehumanizing you. It's just, Nazi, fascist, you're a fascist. And they don't even address the real issue. It's just that they think that they're just like disqualifying you from participating, disqualifying you from even offering your opinion by just this sort of like the argumentum ad hominem or something, victim blaming. I mean, it really is. It's sort of like just calling someone a racist or a fascist or something. They don't have any better argument, so they just it's like name calling. Here it's not so much name calling because it's like a verb, victim blaming. You are victim blaming dead children. But I mean, the fact remains that we are creating our existence. I mean, someone like this is a materialist. They think this world is reality. They don't think that we're creating our own reality, regardless of how true that is. Like Eckhart Tolle in his first famous book, The Power of Now, he's talking about someone who's unhappy and they're like raging against the world or raging against this or that. Really, it's as though they're standing in a mirror raging at their own reflection because this world is like a reflection of our inner experience. So, I mean, you'd have to have some kind of metaphysical argument with this person, a metaphysical debate against materialism because they seem to be like materialistic realists, or scientific realists, something like that. So, I mean, if they want to call it victim blaming, so be it. I don't give a shit if they call it victim blaming because the fact remains that all suffering is ultimately self-inflicted, although there is no self. I mean, even so, in like a worldly, Wohara Desana, all dukkha is volitional and self-inflicted. Although it's very tricky if you're a kid and you're being abused or being shot by an Israeli soldier or something. I don't think the Israelis are actually shooting kids. It's just that they're bombing buildings that contain kids. But still, I mean, when you experience the pain, then most people are not sophisticated philosophically enough to know that pain and suffering are two different things. I mean, they can both go by the term dukkha in Pali, or hurting in English or something, but still pain is just a physical sensation, and the suffering comes from wanting that sensation to stop. And also, it's just one way of looking at karma. I mean, it's not necessarily all from past lives. Anything that happened in past lives, especially according to Orthodox Theravada, has no power at all because it no longer exists. All that exists is the present moment. And we are creating that just through a kind of karmic momentum. So we've got it inside us, and we're just manifesting this world. And us mentioning, I think it was possibly the last Q&A I did, it's like dreaming, that this is just like a higher level of dream. This is not ultimate reality. But if you're having a dream at night in your sleep, you think that it's real while you're dreaming it. And then when you wake up, you realize it wasn't real. But also, very few people nowadays would deny that we are creating our own dreams. Not very many people nowadays would think that some deity is implanting those dreams into us. Maybe a Muslim who thinks that Allah is really all-powerful, they might think that their dreams are caused by Allah. But most people in the West, it's just, we're creating our own dreams, and we are creating this dream. And it's just like kids, especially, they're just not very good at driving their cosmic vehicle yet, I guess. Some people, just people in general. So it's not so much that, something bad happens to you because you were a Roman soldier 2,000 years ago who helped butcher a barbarian village. It could be that you're just not skillful. You're not fully awake. You're still fairly ignorant with regard to what reality is and isn't. And so you're just messing up. You're creating this reality, but still, and it's mainly in accordance with your karma. I mean, it is in accordance with your karma, but your karma is this will, Schopenhauerian will, just moving forwards through time. And it's hard to explain. So let me get back to these arguments here. One argument, these dead children in Palestine, did they just have bad karma from a past life? Well, not necessarily from a past life, but yeah, there is a good chance of it. I mean, that would be like the main Buddhist explanation, is that lifetime after lifetime, they're doing good deeds and bad deeds, and both the good deeds and the bad deeds create this, it just adds into your stream of your volitional consciousness, and it's going to have effects. And even though they can't remember their past lives, well, it's just because, they're not fully awake yet. And it's too bad, really. I mean, just you look at just the horror of what has happened in this world since human beings have been here. I mean, there's always bad stuff happening. And that's partly because there's also good stuff happening that it all has to balance out in the long run. But anyway, let's see. We just give reasons to our life, but it's completely meaningless. Well, that's an easy argument to refute, because even to have a concept of life itself is meaning. If everything is meaningless, then yeah, I mean, you might as well be just blind and deaf and mute and numb. So it's not completely meaningless, because we have to give meaning to it. I mean, meaning is samsara. To the extent that we are stuck in samsaric pseudo-reality, we're surrounded by meaning, because that's what samsara is. Perception is meaning. You're given meaning to something, like the earlier question about, you've got the perceptual field, and then just immediately you're putting labels or meanings onto things, and that's samsara. So we just give reasons to our life, but it's completely meaningless. I mean, that itself it just seems to me to be blatantly false. I mean, that's kind of existentialism right there. Or again, it's like scientific realism. They just say, oh, well, this world is here just through random chance, and we're just meat robots. So these questions, I mean, the dead children in Palestine, did they just have bad karma from a past life? For the most part, from the Buddhist point of view, yeah. With regard to the second question, we just give reasons to our life, but it's completely meaningless. I'd call bullshit on that. I mean, there maybe what this person is saying, that there's no completely meaningless in the sense that there's no ultimate underlying meaning. And I would agree to that, because ultimate reality is meaningless. Samsara has meaning, but reality doesn't, because meaning is just like a symbol that represents something else. But this person seems to be completely stuck in samsara, and so everything that they're dealing with is meaning. It's not meaningless. They might say that it's completely meaningless, but they don't know what they're talking about, because their world is composed of meaning. You take away the meaning, you take away samsara, you take away this world. No more meaning, no more world. But they're like a scientific realist. And with regard to the victim blaming part, well, I mean, that's not scientific realism there. That's just going along with sort of modern sort of attempting to refute something by just coming up with a convenient slur. But in a way, it kind of is victim blaming, but in a way, there are no victims, because we're all creating this for ourselves. All suffering is self-inflicted, so where's the victim? I'm just maybe just a deluded person, which almost everybody is, that they're hurting themselves without even realizing it. And then I guess you could call them a victim of their own predicament. But I mean, it's not, they're being real. In reality, they're not being victimized by some outside force, human or otherwise. So anyway, again, Austin concludes this question by, and I don't really know how to respond to these, and they're all very sticky. Any ideas? I can't really rebut the idea that these children are dying because they did something bad in a past life. Well, I mean, if you're going to try to have an argument with someone who is just convinced that like modern liberalism is the enlightened view and scientific realism describes reality, it describes this world and our place in it, then you're going to have to completely reprogram them before you can really make any headway with any kind of Buddhist argument, because they're just living in a different paradigm. They've got a completely different set of explanations for reality, or a very different set anyway. And like, I'm just not a materialist, so I mean, a lot of their arguments wouldn't even really apply. But I mean, if you're going to have a debate with them, then you got to have some middle ground. You're going to have to agree on certain basic points before you can have any kind of meaningful debate. Otherwise, if they're just convinced that, scientific realism is the ultimate truth, or that the Bible is the ultimate truth, then I mean, you're just kind of wasting your breath trying to argue with these people, unless you can. They've got enough open-mindedness that they're able to at least meet you halfway, and you have to meet them halfway, of course. But yeah, this looks like a no-win scenario here, because I don't think you're really going to win any argument with a person who's just like a scientific materialist. And they probably won't believe in karma at all, even if karma is just volition. I mean, if you define karma as volition, chidnaham bhikkhuni kamam wudami, monks, I say that karma is volition, or volition is karma, then yeah, at least you can kind of get your foot in the door. You say karma. If you say that volition exists, then you're saying that karma exists, because they're the same, at least according to Buddhism. Then the ball would be in their court to try and say that no, volition isn't karma. But I don't know how they would do that. So yeah, there's all kinds of bad things happening. Sorry to say. So anyways, now we're going to have a few technical questions from Nature Cure, and then that'll be it. That'll be the end of the thing. So we might be about 2 hours, which is kind of normal, actually, despite the fact that I answered about twice as many questions as usual. So anyway, Nature Cure says, in Samyutta Nikaya 25, dhammanusari and saddhanusari cannot die without becoming enlightened, or would become enlightened before they die. How should one understand this? Well, my understanding is really that dhammanusari and saddhanusari very likely were not taught by the Buddha at all, that it's sort of a later development by monks with too much free time and just too much of a passion for philosophizing and cooking up systematology. So dhammanusari and saddhanusari, they can be any kind of Ariya. They can even be a sotapanna, but apparently they're a kind of sotapanna. If they're a sotapanna, they're the kind of sotapanna that is going to become enlightened in this very life. And what causes them to be that way is some law of the universe that Abhidhamma scholars deal with a lot and commentators deal with a lot, but which never can really be explained as to why it has to be that way. But yeah, I mean, dhammanusari and saddhanusari, how should one understand this? I mean, I wouldn't even bother. You know, I mean, I don't consider it to be dealing with reality. It's sort of like arguing about whether the Holy Spirit emanates directly from the Father or whether it emanates indirectly from the Father through the Son. And there were people like killing each other in like the late Roman Empire just over that very same debate. And there's no way they could really know. I mean, how would anyone going to know about dhammanusari and saddhanusari without being one? And I'm not sure that I've ever met one. So, yeah, I mean, don't take everything you read in the texts very seriously. There's a lot of really valuable information, just profound wisdom in the polytext, and there's a lot of silliness in the polytext too. And there's a lot of just like hyper intellectual attempts at just working out these elaborate scholastic systems that you're going to find in the text, especially in Abhidhamma and the commentaries, but in suttas like this, you're going to find it also. So anyway, I'll just move on to the next one, which is along the same lines. In the Majjhima Nikaya, number 70, the Kitagiri Sutta, it mentions 7 different Aryas or something. Could you please explain this? And again, I've never really been interested in this sort of thing, but I just happen to have the Buddhist dictionary, which any serious student of Theravada Buddhism should try to get a copy of this. I mean, sometimes they're handed out for free distribution. I think this one was free. But anyway, you look under Ariya Pugala, or Ariya, and section B here talks about the 7-fold grouping of the noble disciples, and it is as follows. 1, the faith devotee, or the saddhanusari. Is that mentioned here? Yeah, saddhanusari. That is the faith devotee. 2 is the faith liberated one, or the saddhavimutta. 3 is the body witness, or kaya sakhi. 4th is both ways liberated one, ubato bhaga vimota. 5 is the Dhamma devotee, or dhammanusari, which is the other one that was on the previous question. 6 is the vision attainer, ditthipata. 7 is the wisdom liberated one, or the panya vimutta. This group of 7 noble disciples is thus explained in Visuddhimagga 2173. And I don't know, I mean, I guess might as well. Let's just go for it. Let's just wade into this. So according to the Visuddhimagga, these 7 different kinds of Aryas is 1, he who is filled with resolution, or adhimukha, and in considering the formations as impermanent, or anicca, gains the faculty of faith. He at the moment of the path to stream winning is called a faith devotee, or saddhanusari. At the 7 higher stages of being an Ariya, then he is called a faith devotee. At the 7 higher stages, he is called a faith liberated one, or saddhavimutta, which means that a saddhanusari, according to Orthodox Theravada, would exist for only 1/trillionth of a second. Because that's only when you reach the first stage of stream entry, which is the path to stream entry. That's mega. But when the very next moment, according to Orthodox tradition, like Abhidhamma and the commentaries, the very next moment after you reach the path, you go to fruition. So according to this, when you first become a sotapanna, when you hit the fruition or the the path stage of being a sotapanna, then you're called a saddhanusari. But then after that, you're saddha vimutta, or liberated by faith. And that starts the very next moment. So why even bother to even have, I mean, according to Orthodox Theravada, you got, for the 4 stages of Ariyahood, you've got two stages. You got path and fruit, path and fruition. So you got sotapanna path, sotapanna fruition, sakadagami path, sakadagami fruition, anagami path, anagami fruition, and then arahant path, arahant fruition. That's where they're talking about the 8 noble ones. When it's talking about 8 instead of 7, it's talking about these 4 kinds of Aryas, with each having like path and fruition for each one. And according to the Visuddhimagga, and well, furthermore, like I already mentioned, the path stage lasts only like a trillionth of a second. It's only one moment. Why would you even bother saying that such people are worthy of like reverence, worthy of offering gifts and so forth, when they exist for like a trillionth of a second? I mean, you wouldn't even be able to start bowing before they stopped being that and started being something else. They would have hit the fruition stage. So saddhanusari here lasts for like a trillionth of a second. Okay, so anyways, 3. He was filled with tranquility and, in considering the formations as miserable or dukkha, gains the faculty of concentration. He in every respect is considered as a body witness, or kaya saki. He, or 4, he, however, who after reaching the absorptions of the immaterial sphere has attained the highest fruition of holiness, he is a both ways liberated one, or upādāna vimutta. 5. He who is filled with wisdom and, in considering the formations as not self, or anatta, gains the faculty of wisdom. He is at the moment of stream winning a Dhamma devotee, or dhammanusari. 7. At the highest stage, a wisdom liberated one. And that's it. Well, further details about the body witness, the both ways liberated one, and the wisdom liberated one, look under the 3 Pali terms in this dictionary. So both of these that he was talking about in the previous one, dhammanusari and saddhanusari, according to Orthodox tradition, they exist for like a trillionth of a second, and then they move on to being something else. So why even bother to put a name on these people? It's just, this kind of thing has never really struck any kind of traction with me. I've never really taken it seriously. I've never really believed it. I mean, I've never really felt the urge to believe it. It's like, should I believe this? It just strikes me as false immediately, or just as just superfluous, just unnecessary. It's just all this unnecessary gobbledygook that nobody needs to know this. I mean, you certainly don't need to know it in order to become enlightened. So, yeah. So I would say that Majjhima Nikaya number 70, the Kitagiri Sutta, is a rather late sutta. So anyways, I'll just move on to Nature Cure's next question, which is, to become enlightened, one should listen to Dhamma talk from enlightened one. Is it legit? How should one understand this? Well, you obviously don't have to listen to a Dhamma talk from an enlightened one in this life. Maybe the implication is that at some point in your countless zillions of lifetimes, at some point in the past, you must have listened to an enlightened person. Like Gautama Buddha in this life, he became enlightened without hearing a Dhamma talk from an enlightened one, because he's the person who reinvented enlightenment according to tradition. You know, Dhamma had died out, and then he's the one who rediscovered it. Not reinvented it, but rediscovered it. So but nevertheless, in past lives, he encountered fully enlightened beings, like when he was the recluse Sumedho. He met Dipankara Buddha, pretty sure, if I remember my mythology right. And so, you know, he met with a fully enlightened Buddha, you know, many countless eons ago. So that was good enough. So, yeah, you don't have to listen to a Dhamma talk from an enlightened being in this life, and good luck finding one. Although there's plenty of people who are considered to be enlightened. Eckhart Tolle, Adyashanti. Yeah, there's lots of them. So, yeah, I mean, it doesn't refer to this life. It helps. I mean, if you can find an enlightened being, yeah, definitely listen to what they say and take it seriously. But let's just assume that in some past life, because we've had an uncountable number of them, we came across an enlightened being at some point or another, and then we heard a Dhamma talk from them. I hope, instead of we just like said bad things to them and like drove them away with a stick or something. So finally, the very last question from Nature Cure and from everybody, the very last question, 2 hours into this thing, is Sotapanna's maximum 7 rebirths, Sakadagami's 1 rebirth, is it a legit thing to believe? And I've discussed this numerous times. The earliest texts, Sotapanna apparently doesn't mean like some kind of someone who has like superhuman attainments. A Sotapanna originally probably meant that someone had entered the stream of Dhamma, sort of like a born again Christian or someone who has been just newly converted. They're full of faith, and in a way they're kind of, guaranteed not to go to hell or get bad rebirths just because, there's they're a believing, sincere Dhamma practitioner. But the maximum 7 rebirths and so forth, and or like glimpsing nibbana, so that they're like the lowest form of sainthood. Yeah, I am skeptical of that. And the earliest texts don't mention sakadagamis at all. And the earliest texts, like the first suttas of, I think it's the Iti Wuddaka, refer to anagamis apparently in the sense of enlightened beings. And that does make sense. An anagami is one who does not return. Therefore, you would assume that originally an anagami was an enlightened being, but arahant, like I was saying earlier, in the earlier text, you've got more diversity of terms. And then eventually the Buddhist philosophers settled on, one standardized term for each meaning. And so sometimes it results in like repurposing of old terms. So, yeah, I really do not follow the 4 stages of sainthood. One reason why I don't follow the 4 stages of sainthood is because it seems to be only Buddhists who talk about this, that the 4 stages of sainthood. I'm unaware of any other wisdom tradition, like the contemplative orders of Christianity or Hinduism or any other spiritual system mentions these 4 stages. And a Buddhist could just smugly say, well, that's because they just never get to that level. But I don't believe that at all. I think there's very good chance that there have been fully enlightened Hindus, fully enlightened Christians even, and they just don't have any concept of that. I mean, St. John of the Cross did have the concept of the beginner, the adept, and the perfect, which correlates to the Buddhist concept, of the Theravada Buddhist concept of the putujana, the seika, and the aseka. So something like that, where you can triangulate, you can have 2 different systems just independently of each other, probably came up with essentially the same system. That would kind of put it on firmer footing that, maybe there is really something objective that is based on. But the Buddhist 4 stages of sainthood, as far as I know, it's a peculiarity of Buddhism. And I don't think that Buddhism has a monopoly on enlightenment. I think it's one of the best systems for enlightenment, designed for enlightenment. But I don't think it has any kind of monopoly on it. And so, yeah, the whole 4 stages of sainthood, like I've said many times before, I really don't take it at face value. I think it started off as having a different meaning, and then gradually, as the philosophy got formulated and evolved and systematized and everything, it came to mean something else. So that's it. I'm done. And if you have any questions, you're very welcome to ask, and I'll answer them in my new studio, which will probably be fixed up a little better the next time, because we're still in the process of getting things set up. And look at the URL links below, if you please, and subscribe and like this video, if you please. And I think there's a good chance that I'm going to be starting to upload stuff onto Rumble soon, partly just because YouTube is starting to get snotty and like not letting people watch with an ad blocker installed. And commercials just demean my dignity. I just have loathed commercials since I was a teenager. And maybe I'm just too cheap to pay for the YouTube premium. But anyways, be happy.